Welcome back to the Nautical Chronicle. I'm Closington, and I hope you guys are having a nice Saturday morning. Today is a very unique call-in show. Feel free to use the link in the live chat on YouTube to join if you have any takes that you'd want to share with the show, or feel free. Well, I still need to send in the link to Twitter, but I'll get that in a moment. Um, One of the reasons why I am hosting this show is particularly to put emphasis on the good work that the Vias Dominium Club and the Bluestone Heritage Society have done to put on the East Coast Forum for the Old Glory Club. Those guys are going to have a great time. Um, Great time this, I guess it's today. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it. A bunch of really cool guys are going there. Um, I have to fly out for business this afternoon, so unfortunately, I wasn't quite able to make it. But the guys did a bunch of great work organizing it, and I just want to show my appreciation to that particular OGC club. In terms of updates to the channel, I'm still working out my overall panel for the next round of guests. Uh, I have a few different, I guess, wild throws um, for I guess stream ideas um, that I've promoted to a few different people. Um, I've been very interested in a few different, I guess, niche subjects that require a little bit more of a niche guest to actually cover. Um, One of my sort of fascinations, I guess, over the last few months has been the the history of Hawaii and the number of filibusters. Filibuster meaning the filibuster meaning land pirates, American paramilitary groups trying to seize land all across usually Latin America, but I found quite a few instances of American land pirates trying to raid or seize the island of Hawaii, and I'm probably going to, I guess, write a longer form blog or article for the Old Glory Club. Its current name is Putches in Paradise. I've written substantially about filibusters and American pirates over the last 2 years, so I feel like it would be a good addition. Um, I was also very interested in. Let me see. I was very interested in the speeches of John C. Calhoun. I picked up a nice book compilation of his various speeches and essays um, called Liberty or Union and Liberty. Uh, Union and Liberty being attributed to his sort of frenemy, Daniel Webster. John C. Calhoun is probably the most influential senator in 19th century American history, and very controversially, the sort of political philosopher, polemicist most associated with the ruling ideology of the Confederacy. Uh, but nonetheless, I came across a little factoid saying that John C. Calhoun, like when John F. Kennedy asked for the top five, asked a panel of college professors who were the top five most influential senators of all time. Um, there were a bunch of different suggestions, but the most recurring and enduring option was John C. Calhoun, who oversaw the U.S. Senate when the Senate was probably the most it's influential in its ability to make or break um, make or break policy, and be a host, a forum for all sorts of very long-winded discussions. So I wanted to have a stream on that eventually. Um, I have a few more high-profile guests for the next round that um, might take a little bit of convincing, but I'm sure it'll work out. And then we have a few different, more niche, even more niche than the essays of and speeches of John C. Calhoun. You know, I wanted to have a stream on Evelyn's book Mystery of the Grail, um, and to cap off like my November and December streams, I plan to have a panel discussion, sort of retrospective review of the very, very controversial Chris Chan Sonichu comics, because I don't think anyone's actually, like, they're very infamous and very difficult to actually, let's see, they're very difficult to actually discuss, and very difficult to read, and you have to know so much history to actually comprehend what on earth is happening. Um, but no one's actually covered them, so I wanted to um, host something of something of a panel on that to cover that. Um, in terms of, I guess, the scope of today's bulk of the stream, just working on the Tsesarevich again. It's I'm starting to genuinely hate Trumpeter, just because of how tiny the pieces are, how much of a pain it is to actually build, um, and how delicate everything is. By comparison, I received a few different what was it? I received a few different gifts over the years. At the last OGC conference, I received a little model kit of the USS John Paul Jones from a friend, and you know the pieces are blocky. The final product probably won't look nearly as nice, but it's infinitely easier than this nasty, tiny, like delicate piece. And also, a sort of IRL friend of mine gifted me a kit of the USS Long Beach, which is like a nuclear powered missile cruiser from the Cold War. Um, one of the things that so I should specify, like, the so contrasting the sort of sleek and aesthetically pleasing Tsesarevich, you have this god awful Cold War brick, the USS Long Beach. Um, a high school friend of mine who, you know, he was he was a naval engineer on a certain aircraft carrier. He gifted me a kit of the Long Beach once upon a time, and I just can't get over how ugly its just big blocky superstructure is. It, but I think it has a certain. It takes a certain amount of gall to actually do that to a ship, and if anything, it's a testament to, I guess, the absolute superiority of the American Navy compared to every other navy, where we can have these what is it these nuclear powered missile cruisers, while you know almost every other great power in the world can't actually field any, like, nuclear, like, almost no one has nuclear powered aircraft carriers. But the fact that we had a nuclear powered, like, missile cruiser really says something about how, I guess, how utterly dominant the U.S. Navy was during the Cold War. Um, let's see. I also had a few plans to invite on guests to cover, like I said in my last stream, the the naval front of the Russo-Japanese War. Um, let's see. There's as well as like a few other just utterly random sort of autistic fixations that I have. Um, it's all right. So I guess it's I've done enough rambling. It's time to actually start putting this thing together. Like so the Tsesarevich, it's I was very much tempted in early in the week when as I do, I was looking for model paints for this particular build, right? So what color does the Tsesarevich actually look like? And this is actually kind of a genuine question, a genuine sort of how do you say? It's a genuine quandary that I have because the Tsesarevich, it had a few different paint schemes over its lifetime, right? It when it was first produced, when it was first built in France for the Russian Navy, it had this sort of light gray and red, you know, light gray for the upper hull and superstructure, and then red or um, red or green like anti-fouling paint. However, once it actually you know was needed as a battleship to be used like in actual anger in a war, um, the paint changed to either either like a dark gray. Um, some of the sources say it's like a sort of olive gray and black kind of color. Um, yeah, so this is actually probably the closest to what it actually looked like um, during the Russo-Japanese War. It's an absolute, you know, it's a very very ugly thing. And when I was like pondering what exactly I wanted to paint this thing at this hobby shop, I found her adversary, the IJN Mikasa. So during you know, the Russians, their Port Arthur fleet's flagship was the Tsesarevich. The Mikasa was the Japanese flagship for their main assault like fleet. Um, and it's this sort of dark gray that you know almost all warships actually end up getting painted in. However, when it was like first when it first when it was first built by the British, it wasn't actually this like dark gray color. It actually had like um it was like black upper had like a black upper hull as well as a like sort of like whitish like superstructure and um white turrets. It's I don't know, it's a lot more it looks a lot more dignified and a little bit classier and sort of Edwardian almost compared to just this drab this just very drab um you know navy gray. The same thing is the same issue. I'm having this exact same issue with what I want to actually um, paint the USS Olympia because it famously has this white upper hull, nice and clean. And then it has this. It's called buff. Buff is sort of tannish, a sort of tannish mustard color. Um, Sort of tannish mustard color that. I'll just put this in the going in the background. But the thing is, as much as everyone loves, it's like the great white fleet. Like everybody loves this beautiful bronzy like superstructure look. However, when it was actually used in combat and it wasn't just for show, they painted oh, no, this is still for show. Um they painted the entire thing this ugly, drab, dark gray that everything else gets painted. So, what do I actually want to do? Um so for the Tsesarevich, I'm still like on the fence as to whether I want this like nice sort of aesthetic light gray or if I want to do like the ugly like black colored paint, which I know it won't look particularly good, but it's exactly what it looked like when it was in combat. And if I made the built the Mikasa later, it's probably exactly, you know if I built the Mikasa, it'll probably be the combat gray too. So it's it's a predicament. Do I want peacetime colors or wartime colors? And I'm not entirely satisfied with either option. Um, like it wouldn't be that bad if I just did peacetime, or wartime, but I wanted them to be somewhat complementary. Um, in terms of what I'm going to build after the Tsesarevich, oh, I do have this model of the CSS Alabama. Like I've been taking forever to know rig it because before I have to rig it, I need to make adjustments to the sort of cheap, junky plastic sails that like I need to make alterations to the sails and cut cut them out a little bit more, and that is a very delicate process that I can easily mess up, and I hate rigging. So the Alabama's currently staring me down in a very unflattering kind of way. Like right next to my desk, um, the Alabama's just staring me down, telling me that I need to wrap up her rigging and put her into a nice place on my shelf. But she's not done. She's just not done, and you can't actually rush it either. Um, like I rushed the early section of um, putting up her rigging, and it doesn't look great. Um, the Alabama is my biggest model so far. I think it's like 2.5 feet long and like like a foot or 2 feet high. It's ginormous, and I made several mistakes when I was you know building her and painting her because um, you guys probably can't tell, but I'm not a particularly great model builder. So making mistakes on such a big ship is it's gonna haunt me for the rest of my life, I feel. So this is Zarevich, though. This thing is already kind of haunting me because as I showed in my last stream, the pieces are absolutely tiny. Like once pieces start getting to be smaller than like a grain of rice, it's very it becomes very delicate. You can't actually handle it that much. You start losing pieces, and that is no good. So I think there are something like 18 or so of these little tiny lifeboats. Um, this isn't nearly as bad as, a bunch of other sort of World War II models that have like 30 even smaller lifeboats. This is a 1/130th or 1 to 350 scale model. Um, a lot of 1/700th models, the battleships of World War II, you know, for reference, are twice as long as the Tsesarevich, but um, the fact that uh, it's 1/17 or 1/700th rather than 1/330 means that it's scaled down twice as much, but all of the pieces are twice as small as well. So it's a conundrum. This should be fine. So a lot of these little lifeboats are going to end up having a wooden facade over them, mostly because it looks infinitely better. Um, I should actually put these. Should actually try and put these on. Yeah, like you probably can't see, but these tiny lifeboats, there's like a there's like a small like little gap that you can see between the top piece and the rest of the hull. It's very unfortunate, but I think it can actually be covered up with um, a thicker coat of paint. You know, sometimes like primers can um, kind of flood it a little bit. This is actually very dangerous because um, if you end up flooding so the details just you know looks like a blob. That is no good. Let's see, B3. So one of the things that I forgot to do early earlier when I was putting this thing together was there are a few sort of like fins on both sides of the hull that I still need to glue onto it. Yeah. So overall, the this is actually starting to become probably more of a hassle than it's actually worth. Um, these are just excruciating models. Um, but the thing is, even though Trumpeter is usually a very, very good brand, um, you can't really see any panel lines along the side, um, like above where you should have red fouling paint. Um, like below here, like here down, it should be red, and above it should be black for when it's when the ship was actually in combat. Um, but for some reason, a lot of these model makers are either too lazy or don't have the right level of detail to like detail in their engineering to actually put on these tiny panel lines on the bottom of the hull. Okay. Like a little while ago, a friend of mine told me that when I'm just carving these little tiny plastic pieces, he said that it looked like I was like whittling, and it it kind of is. Like plastic has a little bit more resistance than a lot more resistance than something like soap, but less resistance than um, something like wood. Most people, it's not really recommended that you use like this type of knife to actually make models, because if you make if you actually make a sort of gash, then you end up disfiguring your model, and so these pieces are so small that you can accidentally like really do damage to it. um let's see. Right, so where do these actually go? Okay, so these are supposed to go along here. Oh, is this the right one? This one here is the right one. I'll probably have to glue that on after the stream. Let's see what we need. What do we need next? Um, Actually kind of lost my place a little bit. Um, right. So these tiny little lifeboats. Um, One of the streams I wanted to have eventually was I was going to invite someone who was already in the Navy to actually discuss um, the the sort of different types of naval vessels that are still around today and where exactly they came from, because most people don't know, but destroyers, right? Why are they called destroyers? Like usually destroyers are sort of smaller, um, little workhorses that do a whole lot of the sort of small tasks that a lot of the bigger capital ships um, shouldn't be wasting their time on. Destroyers originally came into existence during this time of the pre-dreadnoughts, um, when um, when torpedoes first started becoming a thing. So what you know, it was self-guided torpedoes first came into existence, I think, in like the 1660s, 1670s, or I'm sorry, the 1860s, 1870s, and you know, is pretty easy to just take one of these tiny little boats, strap a little motor on the end, and put a little torpedo in the front and send it straight towards, the battleship, launch the torpedo, and take out these giant pieces of these giant, behemoths with a very, very tiny investment into a torpedo boat. So, as counters, um, battleships, started carrying on hand torpedo boat destroyers like this one over here, whose main goal was to be small, cheap, and fast enough to be transported by these battleships, but fast enough to take out these torpedo boats before, like destroy the torpedo boats before they could get anywhere close to the big expensive battleships. Um, so that's how torpedo boat destroyer turned into just destroyer. Um, and I remember I was chatting on Twitter not too long ago. Um, or no, it wasn't Twitter. It was Telegram. I was chatting with is it Christopher Sandbatch, and he made the point that his favorite sort of type of naval vessel is like the cruiser, which is probably unironically true. Just as like in terms of what types of ships are interesting, the cruisers usually have the most interesting role to play in navies. Um, so the cruiser actually comes from um, the predecessor of the modern day, you know, cruiser is the sort of Age of Sail frigate, where they're not small vessels. Frigates are Age of Sail frigates aren't small vessels; they're quite large. But their main goal was just to cruise from point A to point B to um, to have enough firepower firepower and muscle to do all sorts of random tasks that it you know might come across while cruising across the world, right? Frigates, old timey frigates, Age of Sail, think like Master and Commander. Their goal was to you know be the little workhorses doing all of the random naval operations that need to be doing that the bigger ships of the line either they don't have the speed to do it, or waste of time and money and not enough like dexterity. So the same sort of stratagem still applies with the distinction between battleships and cruisers, even in like the age of these pre-dreadnoughts. So think like um, late 1800s. So you had these big battleships, right? But they're very slow. They can take out just about anything, but they're still, big, armored, slow. They're mostly used for, um, and they were mostly used for defending, homeland ports. Um, so what you ended up with were protected cruisers like the USS Olympia, which going to build eventually. Um, Fast, light, less armed, less heavily armed, but could do all sorts of like tasks ranging from like commerce raiding to oh shoot, knock this over. All right, there we go. So overall, I guess fleet composition. and what these fleets used to look like back in the day. Um, I guess to get back to the point of like cruisers versus battleships. Um, Back in the sort of mid 1800s to late 1800s, um, France, it had its big blow up in European history under Napoleon. But after Napoleon first, France had to sort of settle into a sort of secondary great power status behind Great Britain, and it France wasn't going to be the naval superpower that could overtake Britain, just in terms of financing and you know power projection. But in order to make up the for its deficit, France threw its weight and financing at all sorts of sort of wonder weapon experiments. One of which was this sort of ugly tumble home design, but another was um, torpedo boats, um, submarines, um, and the main idea between which it was called like the French New School of naval strategy, um, was that cheap and fast could defeat traditional heavy gun battle fleets. And this was eventually actually disproven in the first Sino-Japanese War, right? Where the Japanese fleet, this is like 1890s, right? Um, Japan wanted it was a spat between Japan and China over the nominal control of Korea, the Kingdom of Korea. And what happened was Japan didn't have any battleships, but had all sorts of big cruisers and very fast torpedo boats. And even though like China had a bunch of these big battleships, um, they didn't actually have any ammunition. Like only half of their ammunition actually worked, and their crews were not very good, not very disciplined, not very well trained. Um, so what happened was, um, oh, shoot, I was just looking at the instructions and seeing what order I needed to put the wood facade onto these. I should put on the facade after after painting this, because I have to attach like a little gun to the top of this, and you can't attach the gun um, without having this surface painted first, or without having you can't attach the gun without having the facade put on it first. So, I'll get to that later. Um, so what was it? The first Sino-Japanese War, right? The the Japanese fleet was able to defeat the Qing Empire Chinese fleet pretty easily, but not without um, a lot of close calls. So yeah, eventually these torpedo boat destroyers were developed, and French um, naval tactics kind of went by the wayside. Hmm. Just looking at these plans, I'm almost half tempted to actually put together some of these turrets. Put together some of these turrets now rather than later. One of the issues with this particular fleet or this particular ship is that you end up having these decks, but each of like the deck doesn't have like a the deck doesn't have like a uniform superstructure. They're all these separate little buildings they have to paint individually rather than just one whole thing. And that's painting takes just forever to set up. It's kind of infuriating. Now, photo etch, I've actually never tried to use etch before, but should I actually start this today? I probably can. Um, let's see. The the issue with this photo etch. So these are tiny, thin brass plates of you know lasered out, fine details. Like they're finer details than anything that these plastic molds can produce, but they're so fragile that one wrong bend and you accidentally snap it off, and you know it's quite a hassle. But the final product should actually look amazing. Let's see. Actually, yeah, this boat right here, this boat right here is supposed to be an actual torpedo boat with one little torpedo strapped to the front. This is supposed to be a little torpedo boat destroyer with a little gun attached to destroy the torpedo boats that the enemy sends out your way. Like, I don't think people really know this, but um, uh, the attack on Fort Arthur or Port Arthur back in the Russo-Japanese War. So what happened during the Russo-Japanese War, right, was during the first Sino-Japanese War, right, Japan essentially dominates um, the Qing Empire and is able to so successfully overrun Japanese or Chinese lines that um, that foreign powers have to say that no, you can't just outright annex or rip off chunks of Manchuria, northern China. Um, and out of this intervention of the greater powers in the first Sino Japanese War, what happens is that Russia gets a lease port um, off of China, uh, the titular Port Arthur, um, because there's this just gigantic um, trans-Siberian railway connecting, Moscow all the way to China, essentially in the Far East. And Russia gets Port Arthur, but at the cost of paying Japan, all sorts of indemnities as, their way of trying to bribe Japan um, into accepting that they stole this Chinese port from China. And what Japan did was it invested all the money that Russia gave them as hush money into buying big battleships, either building these big battleships themselves, or having the UK build them for them. So Russia, there was as part of this initial leasing agreement, Russia agreed to evacuate Manchuria. Have Russian troops evacuate Manchuria. Russian troops were trying to protect the railway, and there were all sorts of lawless bandits that the Qing Empire couldn't actually quell. So what happened was, um, Japan, outraged that Russia wouldn't actually take its troops out of Manchuria. What they did was they launched a like you know, a surprise attack on the Russian fleet in Port Arthur. They sent a bunch of these tiny torpedo boats out in the middle of the night to preemptively sink the Russian fleet. This didn't act. They were able to actually damage quite a few of these Russian battleships. They didn't really sink anything, but they caused a significant amount of damage that caused, you know, a lot of heartache for Russians. Um, and then there was sort of Russian attempt to break out of Port Arthur called the Battle of the Yellow Sea, which is probably like the largest, maybe it would be like the second largest pre-dreadnought battleship battle of all time, outside of the Battle of Tsushima, which was later in the war. Battle of the Yellow Sea. Essentially, the Russians try to break out. Oh, this is the Battle of the Yalu River. Battle of the Yellow Sea. Um, it starts out as a sort of stalemate where this isn't like the Russian Port Arthur battleship fleet is probably one of their best fleets, best trained, best equipped. And the Japanese fleet, they have one big battle fleet, um, and they duke it out. It starts out as a stalemate, but unfortunately, one lucky shot that the Japanese make hits the bridge of the Russian admiral's ship. The Russian admiral, he dies. His helmsman dies. His ship starts drifting off course, and then what happens is that the Russian fleet follows him and ends up, getting divided and conquered by the Japanese. The Tsesarevich, the flagship at, one of, it wasn't, I don't think it was the flagship at this battle, but it ends up having to flee to safe harbor in China, um, while the Japanese, dismantle the rest of the Russian fleet. This is such a disaster that the Russians have to order a second fleet to relieve the destroyed fleet in Port Arthur. So this is the doomed second Pacific Squadron, where the Russian Empire puts together, a crack team of their rusting, third or fourth tier, like aging battleships from St. Petersburg and the Black Sea squadrons, ships them off like on a world touring, voyage from St. Petersburg all the way around Africa and Asia to get to Port Arthur to relieve Port Arthur. This is a very notoriously like damned cruise where you know all sorts of mishaps happen. Drakinifo actually covers this best in one of his videos. But when they finally arrive, this rusted hunk of junk fleet like ends up getting absolutely demolished by the Japanese fleet in this Battle of Tsushima. Um, Now, the issue with the so the issue with I guess pre-dreadnoughts and um I guess this early battleship design is that if you look at Battleship Tsesarevich, um there are, you know, two big guns, right? Two big guns in or two big turrets. Two big guns in the front, two big guns in the back, and then six of these like smaller secondary guns scattered throughout. Plus like a billion of these itty bitty tiny like tertiary guns. The issue with this is that one of the issues was that modern day fire control and targeting really wasn't a thing. Uh, so you wanted to maximize the number of shots that you sent out. Like notoriously, like in the Battle of Manila Bay, during the American the Spanish American War, um, the American fleet only really had an accuracy of about like 1%. Only 1% of the shots fired from the U.S. fleet actually hit the Spanish fleet. Um, so you want to have as many guns on the ship as possible. Um, however, like this is just because they didn't really have great um, aiming. So eventually, we ended up having like um, better fire control systems that are able to, you know, track and target enemy ships better. Um, and what happened was the British came up with the HMS Dreadnought. It's this 352 right over here. Um, Now the Dreadnought, it's the basic the basic idea of the Dreadnought here is that um, we could save space on we could save space by not having the secondary and tertiary armament and only having like six big guns of uniform strength because the tiny guns aren't going to sink an enemy vessel. These big guns are going to destroy the enemy vessel. So, you know, these ended up being like the big ship killers. These the dreadnoughts. The big cannons are ship killers. Anything smaller is just not even worth it. And these dreadnoughts will be surrounded by, smaller caliber carrying like cruisers and destroyers anyways. So they don't even really need the smaller armament. They don't need to be like they don't even really need to have like the capabilities of sinking tinier ships if they're sailing in these big fleets. So that's how like these big dreadnoughts came about. It was just aiming got a whole lot better, and there was a whole lot less of a need to use secondary and tertiary armaments. So primary armament was all that was really needed for the big ships of the line. Um, I thought about picking up like I've seen like I know that there's like a model kit for the dreadnought at my like little local hobby shop, but not gonna lie, it's in terms of aesthetics, it's just not really doing it for me, like this top deck and separate bottom deck, it just looks strange. Um, it looks like one of those older cars with like a really big engine in the front and a tiny little cabin in the back. it's like you compare this to like any of the pre-dreadnoughts, or even like, you know, the this actually kind of reminds me of like the HMS Nelson. Um, so usually you want to have, most modern day battleships have two big guns or two big turrets in the front, one big turret in the back for stability purposes. Um, the HMS Nelson said, well, why don't we just put three big turrets in the front and save us some heart, save us a little bit of, um, like change things up just a little bit. It's I won't say that it was. I don't think it was like that bad in terms of its capabilities during World War II, but it's a choice. Um, I was also considering, after building like the Tsesarevich and building the finishing up the HMS, or I'm sorry, the CSS Alabama. Um, After the Tsesarevich, maybe finally knock out the USS Olympia, but like I came across a kit for, shoot, what was it called? Um, I came across a kit for the USS Arizona. Not too long ago, I actually visited the USS Arizona, a memorial in Port Harbor. It's it's a very solemn place, and it's I think this has a little bit more of it's significantly easier than this is Zarevich, because its entire like superstructure is painted one color. You only really need to do one coat of paint on this, um, and you can all paint like this entire area at the same time. But you can like paint all of these like the same color, separately, put the facade down, glue these superstructure and turrets on, and then boom, you're done. There's no, you don't have to, you only have to paint like six like four turrets and two pieces of um, superstructure separately, as opposed to like a billion tiny parts separately in all these like little sub compartments that the trumpeter Tsesarevich has. Um, I was also considering picking up a kit for the IJN Nagato. So I don't really have much affiliate, much of an affiliation or preference for the Japanese Navy. Um, I'm just kind of fascinated by the fact that they went with such a strange uh, design choice. Um, it's So what makes the Nagato so kind of cool is, like a lot of the other Japanese battleships, in the interwar period between World War I and World War II, the Japanese had, you know they're called like pagodas. The like Japanese sort of Buddhist temple pagodas. They're these sort of tiered towers that are sort of earthquake proof. And for some reason, they like the Japanese thought, hey, let's build a pagoda for the ship superstructure. Um, like these super tall towers. I mean, it looks pretty cool. Um, and in terms of building, you know, you have the pagoda in the front. You have the sort of smokestack in the middle. Then you have this sort of observation tower in the back. And those three pieces of superstructure can be and built as a whole, and then attached afterwards once you're done, painting it. So it's I don't know. I might work on this, or I might pick this up at some point. Um, After I end up working on the Alabama, like I figure, like I've sort of divvied up a certain amount of space to have like one big ship in progress, the Alabama, then one small ship, like the Tsesarevich that I'm working on at any one time. Um, so once I finish up the Alabama, my plan is to my plan is to build either the Sun King or the HMS Victory. Um, I'm kind of on the fence because on one hand, everybody absolutely loves the HMS Victory. The Victory, it has a certain reputation, right? Especially among like sentimental Brits. Um, and it has a very its paint scheme is very easy too, and its design is very sort of tight and sleek. Um, to like by comparison, um, Le Soleil Royal, it's the flagship for the Sun King Louis XIV. It's intricate. It's very royal. It's very regal. There are there's all sorts of ornamentation, but that's where its beauty really is, the ornamentation. Um, like either of these ships is going to have like a billion different lines to rig, which is going to be its own like hassle. And having like 108 cannons, that's going to be fun, but it's also going to be pretty, like each of the individual pieces are pretty easy to build and easy to paint because they're not like each of the pieces is not smaller than a grain of rice. So that's one of the pluses. Um, hmm, just looking at this, there are so many tiers of decks. It's amazing. Um, by comparison, like the HMS Victory, it has like what was it like two decks? You know, it's just like the Soleil Royale is like the sort of early first rate battleship. It's not a galleon; it's a first rate ship of the line, and like it's built in like the 18 or the 1650s. Um, the HMS Victory, it has the same number of cannons, but it's faster, and you know the hull is more streamlined. Actually, I might need to pick up this laser cut facade for the Victory if I end up building that. Um, but it's I don't know. I think I'll have to like really nail down exactly what I want to do with this project before devoting a whole year to building something like this. Um, I might end up eventually entering this whenever I do build the Sun King or the Victory, entering it into some sort of like model ship contest at some point, uh, at some point next year. But that's kind of like neither here nor there. So I've been rambling for about a whole year, or I'm sorry, for about a whole hour. I figure, it's just about time to let you guys go. And I actually do need to start packing for a certain business trip that I need to go on. So I'll just finish up by saying, tune in to my Twitter for updates to the overall status of round 4 of interview live streams that are coming up in the future. Um, I have um, a Telegram channel that let's see, I'll just pull this up. I'll just pull it up. So I think I always have this. I think I always have like my Telegram channel linked in my YouTube bio or the YouTube description. But you know, what is it? Something like I have something like 5,000 or so followers on Telegram. I've built up something of an audience as a niche meme channel, and follow me on Twitter. Subscribe if you'd like. Um, you know, keep keep an uh, keep an eye out on the Old Glory Club Substack as to when I end up posting this next big behemoth of an article on filibusters in Hawaii, tentatively named Putches in Paradise. Um, and I'll see you guys on Thursday. All right, thanks.